in schools. But in the 20s and 30s, there was a shift to Dutch. That comes when the Dutch government begins to subsidize schools and begins to make consistent policy. In the 1970s, from the 1970s to the 1990s, there are efforts made to make English a language of instruction, especially at the primary level. And the result was that in Sabah, the people of Sabah just said, look, we are going to decide our own language policy. And they just said, we want a totally English system. We're going to have English in primary school, English in secondary school. Our students are not going to do any Netherlands tests. They're going to do the CXCE, just like on the other English-speaking islands. And they just decided like that. They didn't wait for the government to say yes or no. They just did it. The people, Sabah community is very strong, and it's very, very, people in Sabah, it's a very small island, very small community, very, very, people are very, united. Okay, let's put it that way, united, okay? But let's say there's a lot of diversity in the unity, okay? It's united, but they're diverse as well. So in any case, they basically put that into practice. Now in Statia, it was a little bit different. In Statia, by the end of the 1990s, there was a policy decision made for primary school. It should be done in English, the students' first language, okay? But for secondary school, no policy was ever made. Now it's interesting because if you go to Statia, everybody says, yes, we have a policy for secondary school, we don't have a policy for primary school. But it's actually the other way around. Okay? There's no policy for secondary school, but there is a policy for primary school. But over time, that policy for primary school got modified so that instead of having English all the way throughout the primary school, now there are transition years. So groep 7 and groep 8, group 7 and 8, that's grade 5 and 6, are now transition years to Dutch. So the children start in groep 3 and they go to groep 6 in English, but in groep 7 and groep 8, they have to do transition to Dutch. Then they get to secondary school, it's all Dutch. Supposed to be all Dutch. We're going to see what really happens in the secondary, but it's supposed to be all Dutch, okay? But there's no policy that says that secondary school has to be in Dutch. There is a policy that says that primary school should be in English, but the way things happen is you have that transition. There's also a special class in secondary school now called the Faraclas, which is supposed to help the students to get better in Dutch. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later as well. Okay, let's there are two reports that it might be interesting to look at. The first one is called the Child on Bonaire, St. Eustatius and Sabah. And it talks about the problems with Dutch in Statia, particularly because people don't speak Dutch, the children don't speak Dutch, but they're expected to perform in Dutch at school. And it talks about how children are having trouble in school, and also how it talks about how people aren't really satisfied with the situation in the schools in Statia, that people are very dissatisfied with the situation. And this was already pointed out in this report that came out after 10-10-10. So I think that's one of the reasons why our team was chosen by the Dutch government to actually go in and see what's going on, because people were voicing this problem. But then there was another report that looked especially at St. Martin. And of course, St. Martin is one of those 3 SSS islands, so Sabah, Statia, and St. Martin. And they all are primarily English-speaking as well. That is the formerly Dutch colonized side of St. Martin. Okay, and what it says about St. Martin also applies to Statia. First of all, there's no official language of instruction, okay, in the secondary schools. There's no official language of instruction in the secondary schools in St. Martin. There's no official language of instruction in the secondary schools in Statia. Okay, one problem. Another problem, little is taught about St. Martin's culture, roots, etc. in the secondary schools. The same can be said about Statia. Thirdly, though, very interestingly, there's a tendency now towards educational apartheid in St. Martin. So what that really means is parents who have money send their children to exclusive schools where children are taught in ways that are different from how children are taught in other schools. And this has impacts on language policy as well. I think you have similar things going on here in Curacao. It's not yet happening in Statia, because there's only one secondary school in Statia, 4 primary schools and 1 secondary school, but people in Statia are very afraid that this is going to happen there as well, because they have an oil terminal in Statia, and there's a terminal school, okay? And some parents who don't work at that terminal are trying to get their children into that school. There are some other European Netherlander teachers who are also trying to start a school, but so far the ministry has blocked it. But they are afraid this is going to happen to them as well. So so children who can't afford it are going to get second-class education. So in 2012, our team was assembled by the Dutch government, and our goal was to investigate the benefits of and attitudes towards Dutch and English as language of instruction and education in St. Eustatius. And what they asked us to do was to do literature research on different places around the world where you have similar situations to what you find in St. Eustatius. Also, to do surveys on attitudes that people have and language use in Statia, how people use their language, what kind of, when they use Dutch, when they use English, etc., what kind of attitudes they have towards the languages as well. Also, to give recommendations to the ministry as to what they should do about the language of instruction in Statia. And the team consisted of Ellen Petra Kester from Utrecht University, Erich Meitz from University of Aruba, and myself from the University of Puerto Rico. Okay, now we decided to take a non-conventional approach to our research. We wanted to follow at least these principles. First of all, a community-based approach where as much as possible we recognize that the people of Statia know their situation, and in a way they are the experts on their situation. We were chosen as experts, but actually the real experts, the people who actually live with this situation, are the people of Statia. So we have to acknowledge their understanding of the situation and their ideas about the situation. Also, we applied multiple research methodologies. They asked us to do just surveys and literature research. We weren't happy with that. We weren't satisfied with that. We decided to add more components. Classroom observations, interviews with all the different stakeholders, and testing. We actually went in and tested the students. We wanted also to take each one of our strengths, because we each had different research backgrounds, and combine them. And finally, we wanted to make sure that there was a balance between what we found in the literature and actually what people are living in Statia. So here's what we did. We did first a research plan and design in the very early, last months of 2012 and early months of 2013. We began the literature study that continued throughout. We did one preparatory visit in February 2013. Then we went and did some field research in April 2013. We gathered our data there. We did the analysis and discussion in the months after that. We published the report in December 2013. It was actually officially published by the ministry. It was over 200 pages long. So you see what we do. Okay, yes, we like to talk a lot, academics, you know. So 200 pages, that's an average size report. Okay, and then in 2014, hold your breath, attach your seatbelt, buckle your seatbelts. They accepted our recommendation. So the ministry actually accepted our recommendations. So apparently, at the beginning of school year next year, what we recommended is actually going to be implemented on the island. So they accepted it. They didn't accept it immediately. They sent another team to check up on what we did. So they were very careful. They sent another team, and the other team said, yes, what they said is true, and so they decided to implement it. It wasn't that straightforward, but anyway, if you want to know the gory details, I can explain it to you later. But in any case, I also can send you the full report if you like it, okay? If you have some spare time to read 200 pages, I will send you the report. Lots of tables. Some people like tables and those kind of things. Okay, there are lots of that. Ooh, okay, so in any case, this is the part that was done by our colleague Ellen Petra Kester, who has done a lot of work here in the ABC Islands as well, with this same kind of instrument for research, surveys. She did the surveys, questionnaires, finding out what people think about language, and also when people use one language, when people use the other, etc., etc. So here's some of the things she found. Okay, there were 4 sets of questions, one about attitudes toward language and education, one asking opinions about the importance of Dutch language, especially in different domains, one about the use of different languages in different settings, and one about the demographic characteristics, so where you were born, how old you are, what kind of level of education. Those are the kinds of questions that were asked in the survey. They were distributed in different ways, okay? So the questionnaires for the students, we went into the classrooms, okay? Now, the students might not be used to filling out questionnaires, especially the ones in the primary school. So we had to explain it very carefully to them and answer any questions that they had about filling out the questionnaires. Surprisingly, they did a very good job with it. Parents. What happened was we gave it to the headmasters and headmistresses of the schools, and they sent it out to the parents, and the parents brought their surveys back to the schools, and they were given to us. The general public, at the Ministry of Education office, we put a box there and questionnaires by the box. People could come and fill out and put their questionnaires in the box. And then we had meetings with all kinds of different people related to the education system, with headmasters and headmistresses. We had meetings with school boards, anybody involved, counselors, people in the family and community unit that deals with problems that people are having in families. That impacts the schools as well. Anybody who has any connection to education, we went and had interviews with them. While we had the interviews with them, they filled out the questionnaires and gave it to us. So those were the different people who filled out the questionnaire. Okay, so we had a total of 432 questionnaires. There's only 3,000 people on the island. Okay, so this is a very big sample. Okay, usually a sample is like 1% of the population or 2%. If you can get 2% of a population, that's a very big sample. We have about 15% of the population here represented in our sample. Okay, anyway, 432 questionnaires, 195 from students, 164 from parents, 40 from teachers, and 33 questionnaires from others. But you have to realize that many of the people who worked in counseling were also parents. Okay, so there's a lot of people who do multiple tasking in Statia, just like everywhere else, but especially in Statia because it's an island where, you know, we had an interview with one person at the Department of Family Services, and she said, people come to Statia from overseas, and they may see somebody in their office sleeping, somebody who's at a desk and they're sleeping, okay? And they say, see, this person is useless. That's what they're thinking, but actually they don't know what's going on behind the scene. That person, after working hours, is doing 1,001 different jobs in the community, for the community. So they go to their work to rest because their real work is at night. And they're arranging community meetings, youth groups, keeping the youth off the streets. They're doing wonderful stuff, much more than actually they could do within the family services unit. So the person sleeping at their desk may actually be one of the most active members of the community and may be doing much better work than what's being done in the family services unit officially, okay? So this was an interesting observation that she had, and I think it's very true in terms of multitasking in Statia. Okay, so here's some of the characteristics of the people who answered our questions. First of all, more than 50% of the people who answered the questionnaire were not born in Statia, okay? This is very typical for the Northeastern Caribbean. Okay? On most of those islands, the majority of the population doesn't come from that island. Whether it's St. Croix, St. Thomas, because people are constantly moving. And this is something that is a Caribbean story. Okay, in other words, before the Europeans got here, the indigenous people were moving all over the islands too. Okay, let's see. It's March, crabs in Curacao. Okay, it's April, langostas in Aruba. In other words, people were moving from one island to the other because there was good food to catch at different times of the year. It was the Caribbean Sea was never a barrier. It was always a superhighway. And that hasn't stopped, okay? Until today, people are moving from one island to the other, okay? So the majority of the people in Statia were not born there, okay? So this is, that was one of the interesting things we found, okay? But even though they weren't born there, they strongly identify as Statians. And they really are happy to be Statians. 75% are happy to be Statians. And the majority of the teachers were born outside of Statia. And a bigger majority, 70%, okay? And 45% of them were born in the European Netherlands. And we're starting to try to get used to saying European Netherlands versus Caribbean Netherlands. How do you distinguish Netherlanders? Because now people from Bonaire, Statia, and Saba are actually Netherlanders. Okay, so now we start talking about European Netherlanders versus Caribbean Netherlanders, which is also very clumsy and probably not the perfect way to say it, but anyway, that's the best we could do. Okay, so what do people use? In most cases, people are using station English. What we call station English here is really station English lexifier Creole. Okay? So it's a Creole language like Papiamento. Most people use that for most of their daily interactions, except for school. Okay? The majority of the population is only exposed to Dutch in formal situations like school and the government offices. People also use standard English as well. Okay, so here's the breakdown. Interestingly, Dutch only is used primarily with teachers. Otherwise, with your mother, father, siblings, friends, classmates, strangers, it's mainly station English lexifier Creole. Standard English is normally second, and then Dutch is third, except mothers. Mothers, seems like some mothers are really consciously trying to speak Dutch with their children. Why? Well, you know why. Okay, they want to make sure their children succeed in the school system. Okay, so that was an interesting finding right there. Okay, now Dutch is considered to be important by just about everybody on Statia. Okay, so this was another interesting thing that we found. We felt we were going to come into Statia, and everybody told us, this is a hot issue. You're coming into a very dangerous situation. Okay, you're going to be right in the middle of a big fight. We've been fighting over language of instruction for all of these years. Now you're going to find yourselves in the middle of it. But when we got there, we realized actually people agree on so many things. One thing they agree on is Dutch is extremely important. They also say that English is extremely important. So it's not like some people don't want Dutch. Okay? They realize the importance of Dutch, but, okay, and that's the big but right there. Okay, and we'll talk more about that one afterwards. Okay, but Dutch is it's considered important, especially for education in the job market, not so much for making friends or using the internet or things like that. So here's where you get it, okay? Importance of Dutch. Passing tests, yes. Earning money, getting a job, yes. Reading and writing, yes. Making friends, not so much. Being liked, not so much. On the phone, no. But look at the differences in the numbers here, okay? Going from primary education to secondary education, a big difference, and this is statistically significant. So as students go from primary education to secondary education, their attitudes towards Dutch get more negative, and they see Dutch as being less and less useful. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute as well. These are primary students versus secondary students. The first column, here are the primary students, and there are the secondary students over there. Okay, so attitudes toward bilingualism are very positive. Everybody wants every station to be competent in English and competent in Dutch. Everybody wants that. There's nobody who says, no, you should just be competent in English or just be competent in Dutch. Everybody wants it both ways. Huh? That's just good. Okay, and everybody feels strongly that the education system should be the road to get to full competence in English and full competence in Dutch. That's the job of the school, but the school doesn't seem to be doing its job. Okay? So another thing that's very, very important is, this is statistically significant, as we mentioned. There's a less and less positive attitude as the students go from primary to secondary education. And this suggests that maybe the use of Dutch at the secondary level is having a negative impact. The way it's being taught at the secondary level is having some kind of negative impact. So here's primary students versus secondary students again. Okay? So most primary students like to hear Dutch being spoken, but not most secondary students. Most primary students think that students should learn to read and write in Dutch, but then that number goes down, way down at the secondary level. I would like to know Dutch better. Both groups say yes, but there's a big difference in the numbers. Learning Dutch is a waste of time. Very few at the primary level, but it goes up a little bit at the secondary level. Okay, so here's some conclusions then. Okay, so basically, people on St. Eustatius, whether they're born in St. Eustatius or not, they feel strongly attached to the island. Secondly, they want an education system that will give them competence in English and Dutch. But there's this difference in attitudes going from primary to secondary education. The attitudes towards Dutch are more positive in primary, but less positive in secondary. Okay, now I'm going to the third presentation by my colleague Erich Meitz. Maybe we can pause for questions or comments or anything that people want to ask about so far, because now we've done the survey and the introduction. So, okay. Yes?
The lexified Creole, can you explain something on that? Because bilingual or trilingual, that's my question.
So that's the elephant in the room. No, you're not the elephant in the room. That's the elephant in the room. What are we going to do about English lexifier Creole? Yes, exactly. So we took a community-based approach. What that meant was in our work, we realized that the people of the island were not really thinking too much about that right now. What they're thinking about is Dutch and English, standard English and Dutch, okay? So what we see is that eventually that's going to have to be dealt with. But right now the biggest question is this one. So we didn't pay too much attention to that, but we asked people about it. And what we got were mixed responses. There was no real consensus about what should be done about that. So we tried to stick with what there was consensus about, thinking that, okay, we cross one bridge at a time, or one, stepping stones. You take one step at a time. Because actually, in many islands in the Caribbean, you're absolutely right, the big issue in the Anglophone Caribbean is what do you do about English lexifier Creole? Because the children come to school speaking English lexifier Creole. They don't speak standard English, and there's a big problem right there as well. Okay, but Statia hasn't reached that point yet. They're still struggling with another thing that precedes that. But well, I'm glad you're nodding your head, but that's because you're very nice. But somebody who's not so nice might still say, well, you're going to have to deal with it eventually, and maybe you can't go, you can't just wait for it. So it's true. This to me is the weakest point of this whole thing. So see, she found the weakest point already.
You talked about kids from primary school that had a language of instruction in English, and then group 7, 8, they transition to Dutch. And so before group 7 in schools, it's all in English, or you said there was a...
Okay, that's the way, okay, this is the way it's supposed to be. But what happens in the school, as you know, is totally different. So you get into the class, you get into groep 3, and there's a Surinamese teacher speaking Dutch, okay? And then you get into groep 8, and there's a Guyanese teacher who doesn't speak a word of Dutch, okay? So it's all over the place, really. But what happens is that the students get exposed to Dutch in the school pretty much all the way through. And there are some teachers who start with Spelend Onderwijs, doing a beautiful job. The teachers are really trying. We were very favorably impressed by the teachers. The teachers know that there are problems, but they're doing 1,000,001 creative things to get around the problems and try to deal with a system that's very difficult. But no, in practice, it doesn't just happen that way. And then the schools, you have 4 different denominations. Well, you have the public school, then you have the Catholic school, then the SDA school, and the Methodist school. And each one takes a slightly different approach. For example, in the SDA school, they only take SDA teachers. And it's very hard to find SDA teachers who speak Dutch. So for them, they don't do that transition. They just put the students mainly through English all the way. Okay? And their students do better in Dutch. Because they don't force their students to learn Dutch as L1 or L2. They teach as a foreign language. Okay, good questions, excellent questions. Okay, Oh, okay, so we're going to talk about the test now. Okay, so we decided that we should actually go in and do some testing. Find out what the competence of the students is. I mean, this is a very limited amount of testing that we did, but this was the instrument that we used. Okay, so basically this is a narrative proficiency test. What you do is you go into the classroom, you show the students 6 pictures that form a story. Okay, and this one's a pretty obvious story, right? A thief steals a woman's purse, the thief runs away, policeman sees the thief running away, or I should say police person, shouldn't I? Police person runs after the thief, police person catches the thief, and the woman's purse is returned to her. Okay, that's the story. Okay, and all the students could recognize it. Okay, not a problem. What the task of the students was to write the story. Half of the class wrote the story first in English and second in Dutch. The other half of the class wrote it first in Dutch and then in English. Okay? So at the beginning, all the students were, oh yeah, it's a lot of fun, we'll write a story, right? Then all the students who were asked to write in English first and Dutch second, they were still very happy. But as soon as the half of the class learned they had to write in Dutch first and then in English, all of a sudden the attitude got a little bit more negative. Okay. Any case, that's how it happened. We carefully explained the task. And the way these pictures were designed is all the words you need to tell the story are within the 1,001 words that a 6-year-old non-native speaker of Dutch in the Netherlands is expected to know before entering school. So an L2 speaker of Dutch in the Netherlands is supposed to know these 1,001 words. With that story can be told with those 1,001 words except for one word. Okay. And then also it includes the words that are in the English high-frequency vocabulary lists. There were careful verbal instructions before the test, and as I said, the class was divided like that. Okay, so the goals of the test. We're looking at the transition years. Groep 7 and A. Okay, so we want to see what is going on before, during, and after the transitional period. What effect is this transition having on their competence in Dutch and their competence in English? Okay, and is Dutch improving? Is English improving? Is English staying? Is English static? Those are the different kind of questions we asked. Okay, and we looked at the story, the correctness of the storyline, aspects of the story. This is how they were evaluated. The sentence structures, use of SVO structure, complexity, subordination, use of tense aspect, modality, etc., etc. Vocabulary, we looked at use of vocabulary, if the students always use the same words, if they could vary words, use synonyms, etc., and spelling, correctness, and pronunciation. Those are different things that students were evaluated on. We didn't use the CITO-TOETS. Why didn't we use the CITO-TOETS? Because look at what they have on the CITO-TOETS. Okay, so here's something from the CITO-TOETS. You have to, they're asking you to analyze a sentence or chop up a sentence about Schiphol's expansion. Okay, that's very good for station students, I think. Yeah. Or even better for station students is the opening of stores at night in Utrecht. Very good, yes. Or how about the boat people from Africa that are running away to Portugal? Good. Or that on television tonight there's going to be a program about indigenous villages in Brazil. We didn't use the CITO-TOETS. Okay, so basically, who got the test? All the students in the whole island of the 4 primary schools in Groep 7 and Groep 8, they got the test, grade 5 and 6 of all 4 primary schools. And all of the students in the Faraclas at the secondary school level, plus first, second, and third year students at the secondary schools, a selection of those, not all of them. Okay, so we administered 177 tests altogether, 94 at the 4 primary schools, including 46 from Groep 7 and 48 from Groep 8, and then 83 at the secondary school, including 30 in the 3 Faraclas sections, and 53 in the first, second, and third years of secondary education. Okay, here's an example of a story in English. Yes?
You spoke about the Faraclas. Is that counted as the first year of high school, or is it the first year, but then you go again to another first year and then second, third? How is that organized?
Yeah, it's part of the first year program, but you have to repeat some things if you take the Schakel class. If you are good enough in Dutch, you don't have to take the Schakel class. But if you're not good enough in Dutch, you have to take the Schakel class. And many students feel like it's putting them behind by a year. Okay? Even though officially it's woven into the program in such a way where it doesn't look like they're losing a year, the students aren't stupid. They know they're losing a year. Okay? So, yeah. So good, very good question. And a lot of students resent. They feel like they're being punished by having to take the Schakel class. Good? Okay. Very good question. Okay. Here's an exceptional student. She, in her home, they speak English, Dutch, Spanish, and French. She's 10 years old. She's in Groep 7. And she says, one day a woman was walking down the road with her purse. Then out of the blue, wow, out of the blue, yes, a thief, out of the blue comes this story, yes. A thief came and stole the woman's purse. He ran down the road away from the woman, but when he was running, he ran past a policeman on duty. On duty. Okay, excuse me. The policeman saw him and started to chase the thief. Finally, the policeman caught the robber, he arrested him and made him give back the purse to the woman. She thanked the policeman and she slapped the thief. Phenomenal, huh? She slapped the thief, and everyone but the thief lived happy ever after. The thief spent 15 years in prison. If we could only have students like this in all of our classes, it would be wonderful. But unfortunately, this was the exceptional student, okay? Very few students wrote like this. Most students were writing like this. Okay. I can't speak Dutch better enough. Een vrouw was aangelopen en een dief pakt haar tas en rent weg. Een police officer heeft hem gezien en rent achter hem until he catch and give the lady her bag back. Okay, in English, a lady was walking and a thief and a thief and stole her bag while he was running. A police officer saw him and ran after him until he catch the thief and returned it back to the lady. Okay, so it's all one sentence in English. Okay, and a lot of Creole characteristics in there, but this was actually what we mostly got, these types of stories. So basically, here's a 13-year-old male who speaks English and Spanish at home. And you can see the underlined sections. What he did, he went from, when he couldn't find the Dutch word, he put the English words in there. And that's what most students did. Okay, here's another one. A boy thief a lady handbag and run away with it. And the police chases the man. And after the police catches the man, and the lady was happy. Okay, een jongen bof een vrouw handtas en weggerend met het en de politie heeft achter de man gerennen en de politie heeft de man gepakt en die vrouw was verliefd. I don't know what that means, but anytime you say it in Dutch, everybody laughs. So there's something you maybe don't want to say to your teacher. I don't know. In any case, okay. Anyway, the findings. There were a high percentage of the students showed very, very serious deficiencies in writing skills, often in both languages. Many spelling mistakes, no or limited use of punctuation. So at times it was just one sentence, okay? Big vocabulary issues. Okay, big vocabulary issues, we're going to talk about those in a minute. There were grammatical issues too, word order, verb forms, problems with that, and differences in the storyline. Some students told a story that wasn't in the picture. Okay.